winner's bracket to earn their spot in the main event.
So we have the first round already happened.
Yeah.
That's one. Then we have the quarterfinals. That's where we are right now. And then we have the semifinals, and that would be it. So just the 3 total matches takes you all the way to a qualifying spot.
Yeah. I've noticed Esipenko, he's been wearing a hoodie, but he has a very relaxed posture. He likes to, like, you know,
looks very chill.
Sit in his chair. Yeah, very, very chill. You just got to figure out how you're comfortable. Maybe the players were on edge for a while, you know, and they had the long break and they had to relax themselves. One of the issues is after a long break, again, like you force yourself to relax, but then you have to like try to get yourself to lock in at the right moment, and it's hard to keep transitioning between one and the other. But these guys are professionals. They've dealt with this before, and yeah, here we go. Esipenko playing black here. You see this position. Black's got a bit of a weakened structure on the queen side. So, you know, you're hoping as black that white takes on d5 to correct your structure. Should white do that? No. Probably move like rook c1 to at least maintain some targets here and get a small, I won't even say advantage, but a push, an idea, something to play against, which is that pawn on c6.
Yeah, that's sometimes all you need, especially in a game or a match with 10-minute time control. Not everyone is going to play perfectly, and so having a very simple idea to hone in on, a weakness like the pawn on c6, sometimes you can make the identity of your entire game based off just that, right? That one pawn can dictate how white's going to play the entire game. Focus on that, trade pieces in order to make that pawn weaker. Never take on d5 because that would correct the c pawn. Black could recapture c takes d5. And yeah, really the entire identity of the game is characterized by that. And that's kind of a nice feeling when you're in a situation like this. You don't really have to think too much, oh, what am I going to do? What are my plans? You know exactly what they are because of that pawn on c6. So even though it might not be the biggest advantage according to the engine, it's more just the clarity of knowing what your moves are going to be, where you should focus your attention, and that could even lead to something like a time advantage because you're just playing with that confidence and security.
Yes, and in this position, I think Esipenko, your opponent's not going to take on d5. So at some point, you might consider maybe moving a rook to the c file and playing c5. Yes, c5 pushes the pawn up, and it might be a little closer for white to attack. But at the end of the day, you got to activate your pieces. That bishop on b7 is yearning for an open diagonal. Well, that's the move that has to be played at some point if white's not taking on d5. I don't know if rook c8's going to be played first. And often, plan for black when you have a and c isolated pawn. When you have the opportunity, sometimes you play a5 and a4, and you try to get rid of your isolated pawn by trading it, or argue that, well, I'm going to give it up, but then my opponent has double isolated pawn. So I'm sacrificing a pawn, but it's not a full pawn, and it becomes something I can target. In this position, that's not possible yet because, a5, a4 runs into the knight on c3. But black is always looking for ways to exchange those weak pawns for, higher quality pawns from white. And we do see this early c5 move.
Yeah, and this kind of leads into knight to b6 potentially next. Maybe the knight from d7 to b6 would hit the bishop. And again, you're always looking to encourage white to capture on d5. However, if white does take the knight on d5 and black recaptures, at least now it wouldn't fully correct the pawns. It's not like black can play c takes d5 anymore. So there is a world where white wouldn't mind taking and then putting pressure on the rest of the pawns. Because the c pawn has moved, it is a little bit easier to attack. I wouldn't be surprised to see a move, of course, like rook to d1 makes a lot of sense, but also in the future, maybe knight to a4 and putting some pressure on the c pawn with the knight and the rook. The knight on f3 can also reposition itself. Knight to d2, knight to e4. And if the black knight on d7 maybe goes to b6, we could see the knight on f3 jump into the center with knight f3.
point. They kind of say in chess sometimes you need two weaknesses. You could kind of say a7 and c5 are isolated pawns and a bit weak, but these positions are fairly known, and the general consensus and how theory is played out is that, okay, it's a bit better for white, but with accurate play, black can either get rid of those pawns, or, for example, if it was like maybe a rook endgame, it's just something black can hold, because the king will be close enough to, defend the weak pawns. Ideally, you'd like to defend, use your king to defend the weak pawns, and have your pieces go elsewhere. With both rooks on the board, not simple yet. And you mentioned something earlier, which is for sure a case. This is a 10-minute time control, no increment. Whoever has the easier to play position will try to use that to play fast moves, put their opponent under time pressure, and whether it's equal or whatever the evaluation is, a time advantage can really turn into 1 point on a whim. We've seen plenty of games, even Prague, he showed that when he beat Andrey, just built a time advantage and demonstrated really good clock handling and nerves to win a game that he was not better in pretty much the entire time, but he just stayed up on the clock, kept the tension, kind of like, yeah, I'm going to make a tennis analogy again, rallying and rallying. But in this case, times are going down, so the players cannot rally forever. Whoever's lower in time is going to be the one feeling the heat.
Yeah, that's right. If there was a timer in tennis, that would make for some interesting rallies, and that's pretty much what we have here. Rook to c8. The position is not the issue, right? Esipenko has a fine game, but just visually, that c pawn and the a pawn are easier to target. They don't protect each other, so white's position will always feel easier to play. But there's no issue for Esipenko, and if we talk about the things that are actually good about black's position, I'll mention the king, right? That's something that you talked about. The fact is, we are, in a queenless position. I know that the definition of an endgame is kind of a little bit in the air. Some players like to think, oh, just if the queens are off the board, but usually a bit more material needs to be eliminated before we call it a pure endgame. But the fact that the queens are gone means that black's king can exist in the center of the board, and if a few more pieces get traded, we finally get to a position where maybe the kings want to actually move towards the queenside pawns, and black's king will be way closer. So it also puts some pressure on white, because you can't just eliminate every single piece from the board, especially the rooks, because black's king will be so well placed.
Yeah, and we're at a critical moment here, because Esipenko, after rook c8, is threatening c4. Prague, it's a two-game match, so you have to try your absolute best to pressure your opponent when you have the advantage, when you have the white pieces. He's playing bishop b5 here, working his hardest to say, hey, if you play c4, it doesn't work tactically, I can recapture the pawn, and that knight on d7 is going to be loose if black recaptures on c4. Esipenko here says, you know what, I'm going to play that move anyways. We might actually be seeing a pawn sacrifice or a tactical solution here, Mon. c4 looks like a great find, because I'm starting to calculate. You take back on c4 the pawn, black plays bishop takes f3, doubling the pawns, and the follow-up move, knight e5, should solve the problems.
And that is exactly what he's going for. A great spot. And you wonder if this is, the table's turning just a little bit, because we're no longer in a situation where black has a weak pawn, right? He's gotten rid of it by playing c4, and now he's going to recapture. Let's just say white plays king to g2. Black will take the c pawn back. And then what's left when everything is settled? Black has, what's shaping up to be a 1.5-minute, 2-minute time advantage. The black king that we talked about being closer to the center is now very, very well placed for the ensuing endgame. And everything is just starting to stack up. These small advantages are adding up for Esipenko. And most importantly, I'm just going to say, is the clock.
Clock is a big thing, and what you described, as if white failed in their mission to pressure that pawn, which looks like that's the case here, and that's why Prague is struggling, black is better suited for the trades. Look at the rooks on b8 and c8. When black eventually takes on c4, by the way, I was going to ask you, after king g2, I was looking at the move g5. It might not work, but I was trying to find a waiting move. The reason you want to play g5 is you want to stop white from ever playing f4, and it kind of restricts the pawns. Here, what black done is totally fine as well, because this is the position where I'm saying material's even, Black's up on the clock. Black's rooks are better placed as well. Bearing down on the B and C file, there's a threat on the board. The rook on D2 is hanging. And no matter what Pragg does, it's pretty much going to have to be a passive move. He's not happy here. He's lost his entire advantage. He actually has a worse pawn structure now. His knight's going to be pinned when the knight moves. And this position, just after a couple natural moves for Black, he demonstrated equality. Now Esipenko is going to switch from, trying to equalize. Well, now he's equalized. Now he's comfortable. Now it's like, how can I pressure Pragg? He's at 2-minute disadvantage here. His knight's going to be pinned. Do I move my rook to B2? But 100%, if you have an opportunity to press as Black, you should take it. And Esipenko here is for sure looking to pressure Pragg.
Yeah, and let's not forget, he's also got the black pieces. So a win right here, all of a sudden he goes into the next game with the white pieces. If you only need a draw, that's a great spot to be in. It's very tough to just win on demand with the black pieces if Pragg needed to do that. But our focus is on this game right here. I was looking at, an idea like maybe rook b2. It does threaten knight takes e3 due to the pin. But you can also keep it much simpler than that and maybe just retreat this knight from the c4 square. It would uncover the black rook on c8, pinning the knight to the rook on c1. And, as long as, a move like this is perfectly fine. It's definitely not the engine's, favorite move here, but there's pressure in this position. And as we keep talking about this tennis analogy of rallying back and forth, if you're each losing 30 seconds, 45 seconds, it favors whoever has more time. So Esipenko has a lot of different win conditions that he can utilize.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's why if I'm in Pragg's shoes right now, I'm on at 2 minutes and 20 seconds. I'm in liquidation mode, trying to find a way to get into a drawn endgame, trade rooks. It might not even be the best move to offer to trade rooks, but you keep all the pieces on the board. Every decision is harder because you have more to calculate. So he's looking to simplify here, but that's allowing the rook on b8 to slide over to b2. Yes, pieces have been traded, but Black is a little bit more active here. Esipenko's not probably going to initiate any more trades or allow them because he needs something to pressure Pragg with. But yeah, Praggnanandhaa, I think, is in a desperate spot here. Position's not terrible. Clock is bad. And we know if you play this format properly and you use the clock, you can win any position. And let's see if that happens here, or we're going to have a repetition. Knight d5 is a threat. This might be a great find. Oh, king e8. I think that was a forced move because allowing a draw when your opponent's down 2 minutes doesn't make sense unless you really think there's a lot of risk here. And look, there's a knight and rook for both sides. You're not risking getting mated. None of your pieces are hanging right now. Why allow that? So king e8, totally understand that move. If I'm playing Black, I want to maybe put my knight to e7 now I'm looking at knight d5. I'm looking at knight f5, threatening to take the e3 pawn, which is pinned. King d8. King d8, what's happening after king d8? If rook c6, there's knight d7, and that pin is, king d8, rook c6, there's knight d5, right? And that pin looks
and if
very strong.
The other option is like rook b7 can be played. So he's probably concerned that he doesn't want to let that rook escape.
Rook b7, knight c4, and you're hitting the knight and hitting e3, and forcing a tough decision for Pragg. So yes, he might have to give some activity to Pragg here, but he's down to a minute and a half. You go, king d8, rook b7, knight c4. Start hunting that white king.
Yep.
Okay.
So he's going for the most forcing line. And
this is a great move.
Yeah, knight b5 has to happen. He's in a knight endgame. But his king, we've talked about that king position, and it's actually the reason why this game is going in his favor.
Pragg is shaking his head. He sees this endgame. It's almost lost. The king walks over to c5, prepares knight c3, that pawn on a2. And what determines this game? They both have knights, but Black's king is in the game, ready to win an outside pass pawn. Pragg's king is stuck on the king side, and it only takes a couple of moves here to start really looking to win that a2 pawn.
Knight c3, king b4. I mean, you just can't escape. You play pawn to a3, in comes the knight to b1, the king as well. You can even play a4 just to secure that pawn on the a3 square.
Knight b1 or even maybe knight b5, I was trying to calculate. This is another good move. I don't
knight
see how
b5.
Prague can save this position I'm on.
Yep. Knight c2, and in comes the black king. King c4, king b3. There's no way to save that pawn. You can see the body language indicates he needs to lose that pawn, but knight endgames with an outside pass pawn, you can't survive these.
Knights are some of the worst pieces to defend against passed pawns. So white's going to have to use their king to try to watch over that pawn, which means black can use his knight, king, at some point maybe transition to the king side. And even on the king side, black has a bit of a better pawn structure. So not only is this a lost position, but there's just no counterplay. There's no way to trick your opponent. Let's see what Prague attempts.
Yeah, if a2, there's king b2. That's why we see knight a4 first. Very clever, wants to bring the king in, support the pawn, and only then reroute the knight.
So king b3, and at some point, black wants to set up a2, and you have to find a check for the knight. So maybe a2, king to a3, knight to c5, knight to b3. That's ideal. That'd be a checkmate. Prague is rerouting that knight to try to contest the c5 square.
Right.
Oh, but now the king is in a box. So now Prague can consider, do I want to push this pawn? Sorry, Esipenko, do I want to push that pawn? No. The king is boxed out. Maybe the king goes to c2 and starts hunting all the kingside pawns. And in the meantime, Prague can't win any of black's pawns. So maybe we just go king c2, king d2. Looks dire here, Amon.
Yeah, really tough spot to be in. And honestly, Esipenko has just played a beautiful game. You know, visually worse, but equal on the engine earlier. And I feel like he just played all the ideas that were required from this position.
g5, or he goes for that. Yeah. This is all but over, and extremely impressive win for Esipenko. He didn't even have to take risk. Up on the clock, equalized, played all the standard moves, and now 2 connected pass pawns. A knight can't stop that, and the king can't shuffle over because at some point the king has to deal with the a-pawn.
That's the outside pass pawn. Knights are terrible at dealing with it. A bishop would be much better. It could watch that pawn from a long distance, but the knights have to get up close and personal. It's very, very difficult to deal with. The technique is very good.
Winners bracket round 2. Andrey Esipenko strikes first. A win with black puts immense pressure on Prague heading into game 2 because he'll have to win with black to stay